Track 15. Holiday. Jet sat a moment longer on the edge of Joel's bed. The air in the unit swelled. His wrist pulsed 3 times. It felt like an upgrade. He brushed his fingers over his light. From the living room, his father's voice traveled easily through the empty doorframe. Hurry up. Jet closed his eyes and breathed. His chest was heavy again. He knew if he was to get through the gathering, he'd have to fight this old feeling inside him. He stood. He reached for his sweatshirt on the top bunk. As he pulled it free, something under the blanket shifted. Just a small tremor. Fabric settling. Nothing he saw or felt. He worried that the floors were making too much noise. He kept his shoulders square as he walked on his tiptoes, chin set the way you wanted to look sure of yourself. At the end of the corridor, his father was already waiting at the doorway, with a couple of the smallest screws he could find from his tool chest twiddling in his hand. "Finish your food," Maddox said, as Just watched with his hand on the doorknob. Jet wasn't hungry. He just straightened until the look in his eyes stopped searching for a way out. He nodded once and tried to make it look like a choice. The plate on the table still held the bio-host he hadn't touched. Steam gone. He scarfed it down as fast as he could to not keep his dad waiting longer than he already had. His stomach didn't feel right after that. The light of Melody still held orange on the wall. He crossed the room without breaking his pace. Maddox went through the door first and said, "And, don't think I forgot about how I found out you out on Mischief Night." Jet followed with his up and replied, "Okay, Joel was out too." "I don't care. I'm talking about you." The door closed behind them. The roots spiraled down for what felt like forever, the smooth pathway curving through the living column of their world. Lamps glowed at each landing, doors cut into the walls. Some were open, units stirring. Others stayed dark. They passed the places that marked their roots past. Jet walked behind his father, his fingers tipping on the scratches on the railings and walls, the numbers from units of his route. Their past etched in stone, and Jet considered himself a historian. When the route widened into the main atrium, Maddox crossed to the far end. They were early. The sun still had not come up yet. Jet started warming up, making sure he looked busy. Maddox kept an eye on his son as he set up practice. Then some roughies walked into the atrium, a familiar ranger being one of them. Jet greeted them as boys do. Then Maddox spoke. "End line," he said, nodding once. The roughies took their place, and Jet felt himself disappear into them. They stood shoulder to shoulder now, red lights steady, breath sinking, waiting. Practice was supposed to be a time for the children of Eden to get the feeling of the quiet off their backs. It was supposed to be fun. The floor was cold through their shoes, but all of them had smiles on their faces, except for one. The orange light. Then Maddox spoke again. "Okay, so how was Mischief Night?" asked Maddox, chuckling. The red lights laughed with him. "It was good, coach," one of them said with a bright smile. "I'd say so," another said, smirking as he pretended to drink. "Yeah, no complaints here," the ranger let out, while he kissed the air of an imaginary girl. Everyone bellowed. The orange light laughed along as well. Maddox clapped for his team. "Well, I'm glad you guys had a good time. Now let's prepare for Q2. The children nodded. They waited for a whistle that never came. Instead, Maddox began tapping his foot, like he was pounding on a drum with slow, even beats that grew shorter with every run. Charge! They burst forward, stopped, and reset. Each split burned in their legs. The taps grew quicker. Again. The sound of Maddox's heel on stone became the clock they tried to outrun. No praise, no correction beyond the occasional sharp breath, the lift of a finger to adjust the angle of his stance. They knew they'd always been slow out of the gate. They didn't understand why their legs felt this way sometimes. They were told it was weakness. And here, under the weight of that silent count, there was truth to it. They pushed harder. The taps shortened. Still nothing from the man leading them. By the time they stopped to breathe, the first units were wandering above, silhouettes moving along the railings. No one said anything. They just watched. Maddox looked at his team's posture, at the drag of a shoulder, and stepped forward. Again, bring your chests lower. Run through the line, not to it. The children obeyed. The motion shredded the clean memory of how he used to run. He felt himself being rewritten. They paused only when they were told they could. Maddox gave them a single nod toward the next section of the atrium. Let's move on. The second part always came without warning. Maddox gestured toward the keepers stationed around the perimeter of the atrium, several of them, still as pillars, eyes forward. Illusion. They hated this. The evasions, the weaving, pretending the rifts might open here, right in the middle of the atrium. They stepped forward anyway. Go. They ran the pattern, cut right, slide left, drop a shoulder. The keepers didn't move, but the space between them seemed to shrink. Maddox's voice rose now, sharp enough to echo, but it was only directed at one of the children. Do it again. Your feet are too close together. They turned and tried again. Another correction. Get your elbow in. And again. Try it this way now. Each command rewired them a little further. They could feel the irritation building under Maddox's breath, but they bit it down. Maddox's calm began to crack. Do it right. I am, one of them said, breathless. You're not even trying. They started again, lungs burning, legs shaking. The sound of his Maddox's steps followed them, faster now, as if time itself had joined the practice. Do you even want this? The weaving went on for another half hour. It finally stopped when they heard Maddox's screw drop from overhead, the signal to finish this part of the practice. They just stood there, breathing the same heavy air. Then they turned toward the spiral and looked up. They didn't realize Maddox had already started climbing the ramp of the route until they heard the ping hit the floor. They dropped to the ground, wiped their palms on their shorts, and sat for a moment. Their breath still hadn't caught up with them. They looked out at the atrium, the lamps dimming toward morning. This was supposed to make them better, faster, the kind of flyer worth preserving. They thought of the crucible, the roar, the names, the chance to finally turn the light a shade that meant they made it for good. Maybe this was the way. Maybe pain was just another part of performance. They flinched when Maddox dropped another screw down from the top. They knew it was time to climb. The run back up would be grueling. They started fast, legs light, lungs filling with morning air. Above, the spiral stretched like a living thing. Units had begun their day, Doors opened. The smell of heat and ration bread filled the air. Maddox leaned over the top railing far above. He could see his team running towards him. He caught them past the first few levels of the route, as well as other contributors' faces turning as they crossed their paths. A wanderer girl with the prosthetic leaned on the rail as well, working on some calculations with whatever she could find on the ground. Higher, the red lights found other contributors, like a few of Root's team of green-lit flyers setting up their own drills. Their coach's eyes went wide as he saw the red lights putting in the work before his entire squad was even awake. Maddox counted on that. Some blacklit contributors looked asleep from the floor of the ramp as they ran by as well. A drafter near Unit 18, watching from a railing, called out to Jet as he flew by. Jet's eyes moved to them, but his feet still carried him upward. On Unit 22, a ranger flashed through the window of their unit, shaking his head as they saw their friend whiz by. They locked eyes with the ranger for a second, winced, and then pushed harder. Chests cramped, feet stumbled. Every time they thought they'd reached the end, the spiral kept rising. The run felt endless. Everyone could see and hear Maddox now. The acoustics carried every one of his heaves through the air. Even the fray seemed dialed in. They forced themselves upward, weaving through onlooking units and other early performers, through caretakers and sprouts and many more. The air grew thinner, hotter as they kept their eyes away from the onlookers. By the time the first one came close to the sprawling top deck of the route, they were barely moving, half run, half crawl. The orange light, something swarmed in their chest again. A familiar feeling, immediate, the same warning they'd felt in the garden during the Q1 crucible. The warning where their body usually answered before their will could argue. Their stride shortened, their lungs burned too deep. For a heartbeat, they knew exactly how this normally ended. Not here, though. Not today. The thought didn't calm them. It sharpened them. The tightness surged again, blood flooding their legs, their vision tunneling as the roots seemed to stretch away from him. Their body begged for a different gear, a safe one, but something darker rose up instead. They let it crack open. The orange light's breath tore out of them, raw and loud, a sound they didn't recognize as his own. They drove forward. The burn deepened, but this time it didn't stop them. They pushed through the pain that had stalled them in the real race. The route didn't give either, but neither did they. Somewhere near the top, the air finally broke. They surged once more to finish strong, to finish well ahead, amongst the team of red-lit flyers who were still dragging far behind. They reached the root deck, legs shaking, body heaving. It was supposed to feel good, but it didn't feel right. Maddox stood waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight. No nod, no word, just a look. The orange light bent over, hands on their knees, the world flickering between the Fury's storm on one side and the Frey's glow on the other. Both beautiful, both unreachable. When he finally lifted his head, Maddox stood over him and checked his wrist, then shook his head and said, "Get your hands off your knees. Stand up straight. If you're having trouble breathing, do it through your nose and out your mouth. Being on your knees makes you look weak to your opponent." Then he walked away, and Jet stood up with his head held high, chest thumping, muscles trembling, breathed shallow. He waited on the route's rooftop for the rest of his team. He didn't get a chance to take it in like he wanted to. His vision was still blurry from the run. By the time it came back, he was surrounded by falling red lights around him. He lifted them up both with his words. The cold morning air that hit them on the rooftop reminded him that he was still there, waiting for what came next. He just wanted the feeling in his chest to go away. And then it did. When the familiar ranger spoke from behind him, the last one up the route. "I need an ale," BG said, sprawled out on the ground. Jet laughed and replied, "Yeah, isn't this week supposed to be relaxing?" Jet asked, still disoriented. "Yeah, well, it can't end soon enough," BG said, looking up at the morning sky. "You can't even drink that much," Jet said, poking the bear. "Shut the fuck up. You're the lightweight." Jet smirked and nodded in agreement as he scanned BG's larger frame. "Yeah, I'm okay with that," he said as he poked his actual stomach this time. "Fuck off," BG scoffed. They both laughed. All he could remember from the walk back down the route to his unit was the laughter with his friend. Things seemed to turn around when they got together and talked about anything other than running. They were solid contributors together. When Jet finally reached his unit door, he could see from the window Maddox was already inside. He saw him at the table checking the light on his wrist, looking like he was doing calculations in head. He still looked disappointed. The ache returned after Jet had said his goodbyes to BG, then steadied himself to go inside. He moved slowly, still half blind from sweat and light. And he pushed through the doorway. A little too hard, though. The door swung wide, the edge catching the air and slamming into his father's wall with a crack. The frame of the curator's code shook against the plaster, its gold thread quivering. "Watch what you're fucking doing!" Maddox's voice snapped behind him like he had been waiting to release a scream all morning. Then Maddox rushed to his wall to make sure all was well. Jet flinched but didn't stop. He stormed past his father, who'd stepped quickly to steady the code with both hands, making sure the curator's words stayed straight. He went straight to his room and turned the corner so his father couldn't see him from the living room. The air inside was still. He just stood there, headlined, against the wall, with a string from sweatshirt in his hand. He could hear his father's loud voice again. "You know what? Now we're waking up earlier the rest of the gathering. You're not in control." For the first time that morning, he let it out just a few small tears, not enough to call crying, the kind that fall when exhaustion hits fear. "Do you hear me?" Maddox spoke even louder. Jet exhaled. "Yes." "Okay, Dad," Jet screamed out. "Hey, don't raise your voice to me," Maddox replied with a tone still unreadable. "I said, 'Okay, Dad, I'm sorry,'" Jet said, lowering his tone. Another single tear fell. Jet realized it now. The old father was back. He tried to find someone to blame. It helped for a while. First his dad, then his mother. Why wasn't she here? But then Joel. Joel, who'd had the chance to be here, to take the edge off their father, to be some sort of shield. Instead, he'd chosen the director, the apprenticeship, the easy way out. Jet wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. He walked over and pushed himself up to his bunk, arms heavy, until his head could see over the edge. He pulled himself halfway onto it and froze. Something sat there on the blanket, out of place. a dirty piece of gray glass sitting in the middle of his bed, like it was waiting for him.